budget hearing. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Mormon? Here. Dr. Elliott?
Here.
Ms. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Nemekis?
Here.
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Mrs. Kreiling?
Here.
Mr. Markison?
Here. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board? There being none, Jen?
All right, thank you. I'm pretty sure that's the football team or another athletic team cheering for the budget, just in general. All right, just want to give a brief overview, kind of our budget process a little bit, and then some highlights on our overall numbers related to revenues and expenditures, and how this looks going forward. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal requirements, our timeline, revenue expenditures, some of our assumptions that we built into this year's budget, and then a summary. Legally, the board must adopt a budget by the end of its first quarter of its fiscal year. Our fiscal year does run July 1st through June 30th. Therefore, we must have a budget approved by September 30th. Prior to adopting the budget, the board must approve to place a tentative budget on display, which this board has already done. They need to schedule a date and time for a public hearing, which they have, because here we are, and also publish in a newspaper of general circulation that the budget is available for inspection by the community, and also that we have this hearing. So all of those requirements have been checked off. And just a little bit more about the timeline so you can understand how we've laid out this year's budget. On June 28th, we did review the preliminary budget with the Finance and Operations Committee. On July 9th, the board did that approval to place the tentative budget on public display. July 9th through September 9th, what we do is monitor variables and components internally to determine whether or not there are any significant changes that may occur to the budget since we placed the tentative budget on display. There were a few changes to the budget, and I will highlight those as we go through this presentation. And on September 10th, so last Monday, the Finance and Operations Committee reviewed those changes to the tentative budget. If we wouldn't have experienced significant changes to the budget, we would be just recommending you approve the budget that was put on display in June. But since there's changes, we updated them to give you the more complete information. Where we are in the step is today with the board having on their agenda later tonight an approval of the 18-19 budget. Just an overview of revenue. Revenue comes from four major sources: local, state, federal, and other. By far, margin, local revenue for Lake Forest High School 115 is taxes, local property taxes. That's our biggest revenue base. In addition to that, we do have tuition, fees, some of our earnings on investments, our food service, and our ancillary operations. But by and large, property taxes is the biggest driver of our revenue. As far as state revenue, general state aid, which is now called the evidence-based funding model, we receive very little state aid money. Very little federal money as well, and federal money is completely tied to related grants. Other would be intergovernmental agreements, any rental income that we would have from renting available space in this building or just renting out any space for another group or activity. Some major budget assumptions related to revenue. Local. Prepayment of local property taxes, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this later because I want to make sure that we all understand it. But we received property tax revenue this year kind of out of cycle, so we're going to want to dive into that a little bit. Increased interest earnings. Obviously, interest earning percentages, our rates have started to creep up. We're expecting also throughout this fiscal year that the Fed is going to increase rates again. Therefore, any money that we have available to invest out, we do ladder that out to meet our expenditure schedules throughout the year. So we've increased our interest earnings. They've been very low for the last several years, so it's nice to see those kind of tick back. Increased impact fees. Impact fees are revenue that is derived locally from increased construction within our community. And although we don't have large blocks of undeveloped land or plans for to develop large chunks of land, we do have a few sprinkled throughout the community. So we do receive impact, which is a payment from developers based on anticipated yield of children from those developments. So we did increase that in this year's budget. State-wise, our payments, it's very, very pleasing to stand up here to say that they are up to date on their 17 and 18 payments. Many years I've stood up here to tell you how many months or years that they were behind. So thankfully they've kept up. with their funding. We are very hopeful. It seems very promising that they will continue to pay as they have indicated. So although our revenue is flat, we're not receiving any great deal of money increase from the state, we are expecting to receive it on the consistent and predictable manner, which is just as important to us. Federal funding, the grants, they work off cycle a little bit with our fiscal year. So they're not yet finalized, but just recognize that grants, the revenue, and expenditures go hand in hand. So if we receive information that our final grant numbers are higher than we had in the budget, the revenue will go up and the expenditures will go up because they'll match. The same thing in reverse. So we're actually anticipating we might get a decrease in some of our grants. Therefore, the revenue will be down, but so will the expenditure. So they rise and fall together. So we'll keep you updated on where those final numbers come in. Overview expenditures, we do follow the Illinois State Board of Education Chart of Accounts, which does require that we use kind of an object-based funding into these particular categories: salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, other objects, which is where your debt and your tuition payments fall, and termination benefits. Some of the major pieces, salaries, they are individually budgeted based on our staffing report, any known TBDs, which are the to be determines, and any trend data. So if we have open teaching positions or we have an open teaching assistant position, we make assumptions regarding where we think that position is going to be hired. Purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, other, and tuition. Those are based on either historical trends, projected expenditures. Every department creates an individual budget request that is submitted. We look at what the planned initiatives are. If there's something big that we're rolling out as a district, how does that fold through these various categories? A big component to us is individual student needs. For those that you have been able to attend the Finance and Ops Committee, we have talked considerably this past year about some unanticipated student needs that have a fairly significant impact on our budget. So if we have students that are identified with needing something more than we're providing, or a student that moved into our district that has specific needs, we do provide those. So as much as we're able to predict and build those, recognize that this does fluctuate during the year based individual students and students coming in and out of our district. And of course, availability of funds. Some of the major assumptions on the budget side, I gave you here, which is an FTE count. We use FTE, that's a full-time equivalent, so we actually don't have partial people, but we have people who are part-time or who work a different number of hours than others. And you can see the right-hand column is the difference. We are up 1 administrator. We are down 2.38 ed support personnel. We are up 1/10 of a teacher, up 1.2 teaching assistants, for a total net decrease of 0.08. Some of the other major expenditures items. So our teachers, we do have a current contract with the LFEA, and that is a contract through the end of this year. So the numbers that are built in for that staff are set. We do have a salary schedule that we are working off of. Teaching assistants, clerical, custodial, maintenance, grounds, food service, and our student supervisors. So pretty much the majority of the remaining support staff personnel. We currently have a new union and we are in negotiations. Therefore, we do not have set salaries and hourly rates for this group of individuals. So what we have in there is a placeholder, and then once we finalize and finish our negotiations, we'll have to provide an update at that point. Some of the other items, facility grounds improvements. We had 2 major capital projects that we were working on this past summer. One of them is the completion of the elevator renovation. That was $122,000. It's previously come to the board for approval. That work is completed and was completed on time, on budget. And also the final replacement of the tennis courts here at West Campus. We did 2 of the courts previously, and we finished up the final 10 this past year, or this past summer. That was originally bid and budgeted at $630,000. We did thankfully run into some good soil conditions that we were concerned about, and that project did come in under budget, approximately $60,000. So that will be unspent funds for us. Transportation, we had an increase of 7% in our rates. So as you know, that this has been a concern. We've talked about this previously. This is not just only specific to Lake Forest High School, this industry in general right now, as their market becomes squeezed for labor. Their costs have risen sharply, and most municipalities and schools have seen a great, if not much greater, increase in their transportation costs than we have. So not to be unexpected. Special education, as I mentioned briefly, we did have some significant changes to our student population needs last year, which impacted our 17-18 budget. Corresponding to that sometimes is transportation costs as well. So if we're sending students to other programs or we're doing things within the community, that will also trail those programs, the transportation costs. So these are cab services, these are wheelchair lifts, these are transportation to other facilities. To hopefully offset some of those costs and rely less on purchase transportation and cab service, we do have built into this budget the purchase of 2 additional special education vans. So the cost of the vans is much cheaper to operate with our staff than it is to actually contract out those transportation services. So we do have that built into the budget. We would bid those out. Sometimes they do take a while to arrive, somewhere in the notion of 3 to 6 months sometimes. So I would expect that we would see that on the board's approval in October. For those of you that did the light reading and have studied the tentative budget, I wanted to highlight the expenditure changes since then. As I said, if we have significant changes, we do go in and make that adjustment. The majority of those changes came in the area of special education for this year. So these are things that occurred this summer with new information than we had in June. I'm not going to go through them all because you can see that the big drivers on this is we had a tuition reduction of $285,000. So $285,000 is placement of children into other programs, and whether that was a day school program, whether that was a residential program, whatever it may be, we were able to reduce that particular budget based on what our student population was needing currently. Room and board, we did have one student that was anticipated for a residential placement. That these are now being met in another manner, and that expense then was eliminated as well. Miscellaneous, in addition to the special ed, contracted assistive tech, so we had some additional services we were unable to provide in-house, so that was an increase. Minor increase to end of career benefits, and also we had missed curricular field trips, which of course that we do, so we needed to add back that to the budget. That was an error on our end. But in total, it was a reduction of $414,000 of expenditures. So kind of the final budget summary, and then I'm going to go into some of the details. So I wanted to give you the kind of the overview to start with, and this is the year-over-year look, 17-18 to 18-19. The top is the revenue, so you can see our revenue appears to have decreased from a total of $48 million and change to $45 million and change, so a reduction of 5.5%. It's not alarming because we're going to talk about those property taxes. In addition, if you look at the expenditure side of the budget, you can see that we went from $50.8 million to $50.4 million, so an overall budget expenditure reduction of 0.04%. Looking at it, revenue over expenditures. So how are we doing on if you looked at this year as a snapshot? So the $45 million in revenue minus the $50 million in expenditures would appear to be a $4.6 million deficit, right? Expenditures are exceeding revenue. This is why we want to talk about this unusual tax cycle. And so a normal tax cycle in a normal year. In December, the board adopts a levy. So the board approves a levy, and in the spring, everyone receives their tax bills. The county takes our tax levy, we submit them to it, they apply us and all the other taxing bodies together, and all the homeowners receive a tax bill, right? Happens in the spring of every year. In June of 2018, the first installment on those taxes are due. In September 2018, the second installment would due, right? So you can pay half your taxes in June, the other half are due in September. So for us, that crosses 2 fiscal years, right? Because our year ends June 30th. So when we're building the fiscal year 19 budget, which starts July 1st, we are picking up what that second payment is, so what people are paying in September, and then the first payment of that spring of the following year. That's a normal cycle. And on the right is just kind of a screenshot. It's $40,898,000,000 this is our levy from the county, right? So this is what they were going to levy on the tax bills related to what the board approved in December. This is what happened this year. So some of you may recall there was tax incentives for individuals, or basically you can take a deduction for your property taxes from your personal income taxes, but that is expired as of December of 2017. So we had individuals, not just in Lake Forest and Knollwood and Lake Bluff, but in many communities that elected to prepay their taxes. And so they paid them before the tax bills were ever received. So what happened is December, the board approved a levy, as I mentioned, but you can see where I have that first arrow pointing. Individual homeowners prepaid their first and second installments sometime before December 31st, right? So they wrote the check, paid it off. Then the tax bills went out. So on the county's end, they received funds for people prepaying their taxes and yet didn't even have our levy information to actually decide who receives what portion of those taxes that were received. Spring 2018, the tax bills went out. At that point, the county did the calculation and said, okay, out of everyone that prepaid, here's Lake Forest 115 share, here's so-and-so share, here's so-and-so share. In May of 2018, we received those funds with interest. So they did calculate interest from December until they released them in May. So we received those in May of 2018. So now what's left? June would be the normal first installment. But of course, some people had already paid June and September. So we did have individuals then that were left that paid their first installment. And then we're expecting, throughout this month, we're not at the end of the month yet, that those that have still not completed their tax payment will make their second installment, right? So it's basically 3 types of payments went into this year's property taxes. The ones we received in May, ones we received in June, and ones we received in September. So when we did the fiscal year 19 budget, and if you recall, before I said it was pretty easy because it's just the second installment, September's payments, plus the first installment of the spring. For this year, it's whatever was left of that second installment. So some people paid 1 and 2, some people just paid 1. I'm sure there were people who didn't pay 1 at all that owed 1 and 2. So it's whatever combination was left. So once we had 2 pieces of that puzzle, so we knew what the prepayments were, and we knew what the final end of June 30th payments were, which is that first installment, what was left is what we expect to receive for the second installment in September. Okay? When we did the tentative budget, we didn't have all 3 pieces because we weren't quite at the end of June, right? So we were kind of guessing on that second part what the first installment was going to be. Then, just the same as it would be in any normal year, we add in what we expect to receive in the first installment for next year. Assuming there's no tax incentive for someone to pay early or do something else, we should be back on a normal schedule. 2 installments, June and September. All right, so what does that look like and what does that mean? All right, so this is the same slide. Revenue of 45.7, expenditures of 50.4. Looks like we are $4.6 million in the hole. What that means is since we received that money earlier, we ended with a higher balance at the end of 17-18, right? We received that cash that normally we'd receive in September in May. It decreased then, because there's only a chunk that's left for September, it decreased what we have in this year's budget for those property tax receipts, because there's only so much left. So that's a timing issue. It's not that we're going to receive any less, it's not that we're going to receive any more, but it shifted that and we received it prior to June 30th. I know this is a lot of numbers, but I wanted to make sure that I shared them. On the left, you can see where it says extension. This is by fund. That's that $40,898,000,000 number, right? That's the levy that I showed you the picture from the county. We typically collect about 99.8% of our levy, right? So there is something that's uncollectible, right? People that don't pay or things that go into default. So we typically collect 99.8%. The prepayments was 9.778. So basically $9.8 million is the amount that we received in May, which was from the people who chose prior to December 30th to pay either their first and second installment, so maybe they paid it all, maybe they paid somewhere in between or paid a partial, right? People could have done that. The spring 18, which has been updated from when I presented this to Finance and Ops in June, has been updated to show how much did we collect then through June 30th for the June payments. So we received 15.1, basically 15.2 million was collected for that remaining first installment, and then it's just simply a matter of math. It's if I expected to receive 40.8, and I received 9.8 in prepayments, and I received 15.2 in the spring, That determined how much was left for fall. So this number. So what I think is still outstanding, assuming we're going to get 99.8% of the total, is what we expect to receive September. It'll trickle into October and November a little bit. Is 15.8 million. Then we are back on a normal schedule, which should be roughly half, so the first installment of the next levy, which is what I have laid out for spring of 19. So half of what we would get next year would arrive prior to June 30th. So for the budget, for the fiscal year 19 budget, it's those two shaded columns added together. What I know is still left, so that I hit my total, and what I expect next year's first collection to be. Now, what I calculated is, what is that difference to a normal year, right? And there are some assumptions built into that, but generally speaking, people pay a first installment, a second installment, and sure, there are people who probably pay their first and second in June, just like there's people who pay the first and second in September. But roughly, the difference to a normal tax year is 4.1 million. So if we update this page, again, still the same $4.6 million deficit that appears if you just do revenue over expenditures. If you take that and you add in those tax prepayments, so normally that revenue would be in my September payment, instead I received it early, leaves you the difference of $494,000, right? So I received the cash early. If you extrapolate that out to a projected fund balance, if you look in your board packet, you do have your June financials that show that we ended the year with $9.66 million fund balance. Therefore, that's where we start the year, right? So it becomes our beginning fund balance, and we're anticipating the impact of the fiscal year 19 operations, so net of whether or not we receive those payments in September or May or June, but independent of that, our impact of operations is a $494,000 deficit. So our projected year-end fund balance, if all the other assumptions hold true, we receive every penny that I say that we're going to receive in the budget, we expend all the expenses that I say in the budget, and everything plays out, we would project that to end at $9.17 million. Or to equate that, that's 18.1% as a percentage of your expenditures. Before I go into the summary, the importance on this and what we'll need to kind of remind each other, and I also think somehow communicate, is this is going to look like a blip on our radar for a long time. I have had some of our employee groups ask, well, that doesn't make sense. How does it look like we got $4 million less money in fiscal year 19? So it seems, you know, that anyone that's going to look at our history is going to see that in this year, well, in last year, the number went up, and then the following year, the number went down because there was that shift and we received it early. So that will hang in our history forever. We are utilizing, though we did end up at basically what I'm going to call a $494,000 deficit of expenditures exceeding revenues. We are utilizing our reserves then to fund our district capital improvements. We had we saw the $630,000 for the tennis courts, $122,000 for the elevator renovations. Were part of our capital improvements this year. We will remain, the board does have a fund balance policy that requires the policy target of 10%. As I said, we're at 18.1%. Where we are is the last two pieces. The board has on its agenda for later tonight the adoption of the fiscal year 19 budget, and then we'll be having conversation as we go forward. That budget becomes our baseline, and we rebuild the 5-year projections, and along with updating all of our variables on those unknowns, as I said, like things like wages that are not settled, any changes that we might want to implement, any reductions, any initiatives, all of those will be folded in as we update the 5-year projection. That is presented to Finance and Ops, I believe, in October, and then we will go from there. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
So that 4.1 million, it looks to me when you presented your fund balance summary, it's not an equation.
So,
That 4.1 million, it looks from the June 30th, 2018 fund balance summary that you're backing out that 4.1 million to get to the $9.6 million.
yeah, so what we do, and what we have always done, is we've not counted the levy piece that typically applies to the following year. So our first and second installment, so June and September, we always consider them as operations for the next year, right?
And later on, you back it out, you're taking it out of the FY19 number too, aren't
I'm not following your question where? Which? This way? Yes. Oh, this way?
So you're not including it in 9.6. You're not budgeting it, right?
We're not budgeting it because we already received it.
But it's not in, this is where I'm struck, this is right at the crux of my problem. It's, you don't reflect it in our cash fund balance, and we don't budget. So how, where does it get reflected? It's
So,
not in the beginning of the year, it's not in our budgeted revenue. Where does it come, where is it going to come in?
so realize that the budget balance, the fund balance, budget balance, which is what you're looking at, which is the summary, and it tells you on the bottom what that footnote, what that is tied to. It tells you it's tied to a cash balance minus early taxes. So we add in the early taxes from the year prior. So when we roll that forward, that document forward, we will, because we've subtracted it, we add that back in at the start of that fiscal year number. And I have that rolled forward. I'm not sure if we've shared that with you or not.
I mean, if it's cash basis, why don't we just call it cash?
So you could. It changes the philosophy of how the board has always done their fund balance. We could certainly go to a straight-up cash-based fund balance, which means you look at how much cash you have at the end of June 30th and say, all of that cash, regardless of when it was received, that's what we're going to use as our fund balance number. We could do that. That has not been the philosophy of the board before, but certainly you could.
It's really misleading this year because of two things. So because our fund balance looks about what it was at the beginning, 9.6, 10.1, 9.6, and then we're budgeting for $4.6 million deficit.
Right. And normally the only difference is the minor difference in early taxes. Right.
Taxes really threw it's just hard to understand.
Right.
I think it's hard for me to understand. I think it's hard for several other board members. It's really going to be hard for our community to understand.
Yeah, so what I suggest too, which is why, if you think about it as a 2-year period, right, regardless of the timing, it's what is the net impact on operations, which is what we tried to show.
Explain it to me, I get it.
Yeah.
We talked about it, I get it. I'm just not sure of our community. Because the state form is difficult to understand normally. And in the state form, you have it reflected differently. You've got it, you do have it in the beginning.
Right, yeah, you have to, right. The state form actually comes at it a little bit differently than we do.
So we've got some communication differences.
Yeah,
And that's a big scary number, budgeted deficit.
All your explanation should have been in a preface to the budget in our packet that, you know, the community can see, because it is, it's like, what the heck are we doing? But
I know we got this in finance now, so
this is part of the budget hearing tonight. I'm not sure how it posts or how it appears. It certainly can be. Most of the slides are from. I've gotten 0 requests in 13 years, but I'm hopeful, maybe. But most of the slides here are from Finance and Ops and based on questions received. I've kind of tried to retool them to answer the questions here tonight. But this was the same basic presentation I did in June and September to Finance.
my thoughts. I get it. I'm not sure I'll get it tomorrow, but I think it's going to explain it. That 4.1 million is unusual. It's still kind of an estimate. You're saying that's
Well, because you have to make a judgment, and I try to go off of trends of what we normally receive, but I can't really say, would you have normally paid yours in June and September, or were you in all September, or were you in all in June? So you have to make some sort of assumptions of what you think the normal tax cycle payments look like, and we just looked at trends. They're typically about 50-50.
okay.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing, but you said you haven't received any questions.
Yeah.
I don't know. What does everybody else think? Does everybody get it now? Are you okay with it? You're good.
It is confusing, but I think you've done as good a job as you can,
consider it a modified cash because we're making adjustment for early taxes, correct?
I guess I had,
It's minor difference. Correct, you got it.
and I guess to Reese's point, in terms of making it accessible to the community, my only request would be, and I don't know, other than this document and this hearing, whether there's any expression of it, but to the extent that there is any reporting out of the deficit, my only request would be to communications that we asterisk it and explain.
Well, the millions of people watching at home.
Right.
Okay, any other questions? See what
Oops.
May I have a motion to adjourn the budget hearing?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I will now call back to order the regular meeting of the Lake Forest Community High School Board of Education meeting for September 17th, 2018. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Dr. Elliott?
Here.
Dr. Nemekis?
Here.
Mr. Mormon?
Here.
Ms. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Markison? Here. Mrs. Skyling?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Each year at this meeting, our first of the school year, I note how envious I am of the beginning of a new school year. A new start, new energy with a quarter of the people in the building all being new. The new start reminds us why we're here and what we're grateful for. Our mission notes passion, courage, and insight. It's up there. I'm grateful that our high school is small with big school programs. Our kids will develop relationships with students, teachers, and staff because we have 1,600 students, not 4,000. And each student has the chance to have a meaningful role in a class, club, and team. We challenge and support our students so all, not some, will be ready for the next level of challenge after high school. I read something recently that I'd like our students, leaders, and mostly parents who aren't here to take to heart, but there are some parents up here. A woman named Allie Fallick is the head of Global Citizen Year, a gap year program. She talked about how perfect records are sometimes valued too much. Impossible to achieve and often not worth the stress. What high school, really, what life should be more about is authentic exploration. Abby didn't mean years of navel-gazing. Educators, students, and Lake Forest High School parents, I'm talking mostly to you, should encourage risk-taking, failure, and reflection. We represent the community and handle the business of the district up here, and I mentioned our mission at the start. Risk-taking, failure, and reflection are how you develop passion for life, courage to stand for what's right, and the eventual insight to know oneself. So I'll leave it there. Mike?
All right, I will hand off to Dr. Holland.
Good evening. We have J.D. O'Keen with us today. He is our overall student body president. He will be joined in future board meetings, but I would like to pass it off to him so he can introduce himself and give us some highlights from the student body.
So for those of you that don't know me, I'm J.D. O'Keen. I was recently elected as student body president, and I am a part of the football team outside of student council and academics, so that screaming that you did hear, that was us. The student body right now is really gearing up for homecoming. We are currently in the middle of Spirit Week, so today was Pajama Day, tomorrow is Jerseys Day, Wednesday is Decades Day, Thursday is Class Distinction Day, and Friday is the All-Out Scout Day. The dance will be on this Saturday, the 22nd, and the annual homecoming football game will be this Friday at 7:30 at Varsity Field. This weekend, I had the pleasure of attending the Apt Annual Fundraiser for Student Council, where we raised most of our funds, and I think it went very well. And Student Council also hosted our first fundraising event, which was the annual Student Council Car Wash, which I believe we raised over $500 in funds. So that's what's going on with the student body right now.
They're not here.
The vice president is Ella White.
She couldn't be here tonight. So, as you've mentioned, we're back in motion as a building. We had our Institute Days, we had our infamous Freshman Clap-In, which is a part of our Freshman Orientation Day, which is a special event for all of us and the freshmen, hopefully. We've spent some time welcoming new families to the district in partnership with APT. We hosted an event, and it was really great to meet new families from all over and really try to let them know that we're here for them, we will support them, and take care of their kids. So it was a really nice event and a really great turnout for parents as well as students. We hosted our open house recently, which was a great night for our faculty to introduce who they are, as well as the expectations for students in classrooms. Many of our students have been back involved in sports for a while, and our clubs and activities are also underway. We're encouraging families to and students to get involved. We are constantly setting up meetings for parents and students who have questions around our offerings. So if anyone out there is interested or they're looking for a connection, please reach out, and we're happy to meet and talk with students as well as inform parents. We're excited about homecoming week. I'm sorry I don't have on my pajamas right now, but I will be wearing a jersey, probably an Eagles jersey tomorrow. So it's an exciting week. Sorry, no booze. It's an exciting week and a fun time with students. We're excited about the pep rally as well this week. We've launched our personalized scout profile today for seniors. Jim Sullivan and myself, we spent a lot of time last week engaging with parents. I want to thank all of the parents who came out to our meeting. It was very informative, and some of the suggestions that were made are already implemented for today. So that feedback is really important. And all of our students, we engaged in, we met in all of the senior study halls, so that was interesting. Got some good feedback from students as well. Overall, there's a lot of excitement around it and a lot of insight that we've already begun to gain from our students regarding the usefulness of the tool. And so we're going to continue to monitor that feedback and problem solve. We appreciate everyone's patience as we're launching something new, and we'll learn from this experience. Our staff also attended informational meetings, so our focus has been on educating the entire school community as well as vetting that feedback. Right now, it's only out there and available to students. Ironically enough, when we've asked the senior class in our meetings who they believe should have access, they would prefer that only they have access right now. They're like, our parents are already connected to Schoology and Power School. They love the personalization of this, where they can go in and write a personal statement, write their own goals, as well as write external or outside activities that they're involved in as well outside of the school. So they're really liking that, but they want it just for themselves. I told them I'll get back to them on where we land with that. Glee Club is an opportunity for the school community to get involved. It's every Tuesday morning at 7:25. It's a great time for our faculty, staff, students, and community members to get involved and sing together and perform at our school-wide concert. So if anyone's interested, please reach out. Information should be on our website, but Glee Club is a really good opportunity for alumni or anyone else in the community to engage with all of us and sing. Lastly, we are still looking for volunteers to support us in our Open Doors program. This is a job shadowing experience that will run during our parent-teacher conferences, November 1st and 2nd. If anyone is interested in hosting our students in a job shadowing experience, if you have a business, or you're willing to just connect with our kids through your day-to-day work, please reach out to our assistant principal, Jim Sullivan, who's still looking for some volunteers for that experience. Thank you.
All right, I will hand off to Dr. Elliott.
Good evening. We have J.D. O'Keefe with us today. He is our overall student body president. He will be joined in future board meetings, but I will be wearing a jersey, probably an Eagles jersey tomorrow. So
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
JD, not to put you on the spot on your first meeting, but what do you think of the personalized scout profile? How does it work for you?
I am personally a big fan of it, and so are my parents. They were at that parent meeting, and they could not stop talking about it. So I do like it. It gives me that sense of freedom. And I do like it how I really support that seniors should really have it, you know. It gives us a sense of freedom and really to express ourselves without, like, all these other, I don't know what's the word for it, influences. So I am totally for it.
Yeah.
Oh, when you're 18, I mean, when they go to college, you're not, so when you're, isn't there a rule when you're 18, FERPA, yeah, kids' grades don't go to the parents anymore,
Well,
so.
Can I ask
I
you
don't
a
know if
question?
that's true of high school, but.
How many parents access Schoology and Power School? Do you have any kind of metric in terms of how much, from a non-student standpoint, they're accessing it? Like in terms of, because I know we stopped, I don't even know, years ago. A little, well, no, I think you realize it's just a little bit,
Harmful.
it's harmful, right? So you let them do his pass. So I'm just more curious how many actually do.
I don't know, but I can see if Jordan possibly has that information.
More just curious as we're talking about limiting the access, which I would not be opposed to, but just, you know, if it's a minority to begin with, then it will create even less.
Not from what I hear, the community. I think parents are on it more than kids, definitely, yeah.
I have a question. What did you focus on for the professional development at the beginning of the academic year with the teachers? You'll probably hear about an ed committee, but I'm just curious.
You mean for our workshop, our institute days? We actually, for the first day, it was an overview of the direction we're heading as a school with digging deeper. We talked about our achievement outcomes and not settling for where we're at, and really disaggregating the data and really taking a hard look at the lives behind our numbers and working to be better for more kids and all kids. And so that was the opening day. We also had some workshops connected to some of the changes in our district, whether that's safety and security, Schoology, resource centers, so some informational meetings. The second day, we invited Dr. Doug Bolton from NSSED, who did a phenomenal presentation on really cultivating environments and supporting students and building a culture of resilience. And so some of our students who have experienced trauma or other types of, who constantly experience different things that are interfering with their success, really better understanding the impact of the weights that some of our students are carrying and how we can be better as a community of learners, how we can be better in the classroom, but also how we can identify their needs and validate their experiences and support them through what seems to be a roller coaster ride of a high school experience and life experience. And that was very well received. And a lot of our professional development is, well, all of our professional development at this point is not just an event. We actually build in, he'll be joining us for the remainder of the year during our collaboration days where we have individual PD workshops for our teachers to continue to build on some of the themes and go deeper with those conversations. So he gave a keynote, and he'll be back 6 times throughout the year to work with our staff. And from the feedback that we've collected, probably most of our staff will choose to go to his session rather than others, just because it touched on not just the lives of students, but how we impact our students and how who we are actually informs and shows up how we interact with kids. So it was a professional and a personal type of unpacking that he led us through, which was powerful.
Okay, so I'm going to keep JD on the spot here. So, JD, you guys had a really big win last Friday against Lake Zurich. How big a deal is that to beat Lake Zurich?
So if I'm correct, the last time Lake Forest High School has beat Lake Zurich was in 2015, so I don't even think I was here yet. So it was a very big win, and I think the team went into it with a really open mind. We were in there, we were ready to fight, and I think we surprised a lot of people, so it was a big deal.
24/7 is a big win. too. That's a big number. So congratulations. Also, you can get to know JD a little bit better. He's a football player, obviously, but tell us where your name comes from.
Oh, my middle name? Okay. So I am called JD. That stands for James Dennison. Dennison comes after Denison University in Ohio, because somewhere in my family lineage, my family gave the land to start the university.
Yeah. You are a shoo-in to get in there, by the way. Yeah. You're not going to have trouble with that application, let me tell you. So, great. JD, thank you for coming, and it's great to get to know you a little bit here. I wanted to focus for a few moments on Dr. Holland and express our congratulations to her. I got an email from the National Summit for Courageous Conversations not too long ago, and it's my pleasure to inform everyone that Dr. Holland has been awarded the prestigious National Summit for Courageous Conversations Charles Hobson Principal Leadership Award. Yay. Yeah, the award is named after the late Charles Hobson, a nationally recognized and courageous principal and highly effective principal for racial equity. And maybe as cool as it is to get this, it's maybe even cooler yet that the award will be presented in Philadelphia, Dr. Holland's hometown. And so there's going to be a crowd there, I have a feeling, for that. So it doesn't get any better than that. So congratulations. Yeah. Great thing.
Aren't the Emmys tonight? Don't we have a statue for her?
She's going to coordinate with an Eagles game, so she can go home and double dip.
I left that one. But she gets to be part of the budget hearing, so that's, well, what could be better than that? So 2 weeks ago, Lake Forest High School had its annual open house. I think it's one of the best days of the year. Congratulations to Dr. Holland and our staff. Parents always comment on how different school is than when they went to school, and I'm always eager to hear how many of them talk about, man, I wish I could go back, because they didn't have these programs when I was in school. In many of our classes, teachers talked about the influence and impact of the foundation, and notably among them this year was the acquisition of new and much-needed art room furniture. That's one of the things that Dr. Holland had been talking about, and it's great-looking stuff and really does freshen up that space. This past weekend also, the APT held its Be True to Your School at Lake Forest Club, and like always, it was very well organized, and a special thank you to Liz Gescheidel for all of her work, making sure the APT remains such a good partner for our schools. Our school start has gone extremely well. I've noted the changes to the entry and exit procedures at the school and the influence of Dr. Holland's continuous work to ensure student safety, as well as Lane Lindner, our new security director at the school. It's one of the things that I think on day one he was standing out there. It was his first time he had actually seen traffic flowing in, and the sometimes madness of, we'll just say, freshman parents driving into the Circle Drive that have never done it before. And right away, like day one, he said, we need a sign that says, drop off over here and drive through over here. And so the next day that was up and it got better. But the biggest change, frankly, was that there's a lot more students that are being dropped off on a timely basis than before. And the building chose to address attendance, and I think it's working. Kids are very, very much aware of how many times I've been tardy, how many times I've been absent, and that was just not a conversation a few years ago. High school superintendents met today to discuss ESSA changes and expectations. High schools should be receiving letters in October notifying them of their designations. No one in this region in a high school has received a letter yet. Any number of elementary districts have. One of the thornier challenges for our high school is actually something, one of the thornier challenges of ESSA is something that we're going to be able to forego. And that is the financial reporting, because we only have one instructional building. For districts with multiple high schools, the financial reporting is going to be a huge challenge, because they have to ensure the maintenance of fiscal effort by building if they take Title I dollars. So you can't see your dollars going down one year to the next. You have to make sure that they remain steady. And finally, the EdRed as a new director, executive director, Sarah Hartwick comes from the State Board of Ed in Advance, Illinois, and we're going to try to schedule her to speak at one of our upcoming meetings, see if we can get her in here. But she is well regarded and has a very diverse background. It'll be interesting to hear her speak. Mrs. Davis, I don't know if you plan on going, and it's October 5th is their kickoff meeting, and I think we'll both be there. Okay. All right, good. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
There are no staff reports this month. Committee reports. Lise, anything on ed?
No, our first meeting will be October 2nd. We have several applications for community members, and I'll be calling them this week to interview for that position.
Cool. Thank you. Finance and Ops, David?
Thanks, Reese. We had a meeting on September 10th, and much of the content was around the budget that Jennifer just reviewed. So we did have other conversations about the budget for next year and how we would like to try to have a balanced budget. So there's been a lot of work there where there's going to be some work and some ideas brought forward. But obviously, we are fully and happily in support of all the grand plan and the good work we've been doing there. So I don't think there'll be any major surprises in there. Elizabeth Hennessy came and presented refunding options for our 2009 bond debt. We're in a pretty attractive position. We stand to have substantial savings to the district through some of that activity. And then also in terms of the 5-year financial plan, which the current budget year will be the basis of that financial plan, we're about to get a recommendation on the CPI that we're going to use for assumptions going forward. And then finally, Brittany talked to us a little bit about a new financial reporting model that'll be more of a dashboard that should be available in the next budget report. So that was it. It was productive. Our next meeting is going to be October 22nd, where we will be looking at the 5-year projection and talking about the levy. Any questions? Jen, you got anything else?
Thank you. Policy Committee, Diana?
Well,
your name
actually,
next to
Ted
it.
and I had a wonderful meeting, and Tom came as well, and it was wonderful because Eileen sent a nice report that kind of summarized everything from the board. We looked at some 5-year policies that were up for review, and we looked at some new policies that had been written, and we're going to talk about all of them later. Ted, do you want to say anything more?
No, that's pretty much it. And most of them were policy review at the 5-year point is really just legalese change that Sally can talk about.
I can't speak on behalf of
So
the
we
whole
just
legal
want-
profession. I have a question about one of them. I suppose I should wait until it's under consideration. Fine.
I just wanted you all to know that we do look at all of them and talk about them.
No doubt. No, I can see your handwriting all over them when you guys send them through to us. We know. And we appreciate that you do all that reading.
Thank you. Liaison reports, Ed-Red, Sally?
Strap in. I have a number of things I want to talk about at
Okay.
a high level. Of interest, there are up to 18 suburban school districts in Illinois where citizens are currently running drives to get enough signatures to put referenda on the ballot to freeze or reduce school funding. This is just a little background. As a reminder, the ability to have a referenda to drop school funding was a last-minute addition to the 2017 Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success Act. It can only happen if there are enough signatures to put it on the ballot. It can only happen in consolidated elections in odd-numbered years, so April of 2019 will be the first time this ballot measure can be put on the ballot in any election. Petitions are due 12/31, which is several months before the vote occurs. And in order to be eligible for consideration, a district has to be funded currently at 120% of their adequacy target, which is assigned by the state. And if they are able to get some reduction in their school funding, their property taxes in most cases, that cut cannot drop the district below 110% of their adequacy target. In addition, a referenda of this nature is only allowed on the ballot once every 6 years. So those are the rules of engagement. Activity is the most pronounced right now in District 202, which is Lyle. Another place where there has been a lot of activity is Main Township, District 207. Interestingly, there's, I will send you guys the article. They talked to the person who is running the drive in Lyle in District 202, and the issue there is not one of what the spend is per student per year. It's a question about how great the reserve should be. And it's a philosophical question about whether or not the school district can build up enough reserve to do major capital expenditures without having to go to the voters. So it's interesting reading, not because I think it's on the horizon necessarily for us, but it's not a bad sort of grounding us again in how this works. There are a couple of things to think about. Number one, I know we should have this like tattooed on my forearm, but I want to remind you that adequacy is not the same thing as excellence. In addition, although the state uses the phrase adequacy to be polite, it was a little bit of a bait and switch. Adequacy as it was intended during the legislative process really was what the all-in cost would be to educate a student. That is not the adequacy number that the state assigns now. The adequacy number that the state assigns now does not include certain things that are part of the all-in, whether you want adequacy or excellence, such as special ed, transportation, most extra and co-curricular programs. In addition, all it really does is set up the list of prioritization for who is in line to get new state funding. So even though we use the phrase adequacy, it doesn't necessarily mean what it really costs to educate a student. And it is interesting to see that some of the conversation that's going on around whether or not this should be a referenda is due to that misunderstanding about what adequacy means. That was my longest one. A couple of other things. On August 19th, Governor Rauner vetoed State Bill 2892, which I had reported on before as having passed both the House and the Senate. This would have raised the minimum salaries for Illinois teachers to $40,000 within the next 5 years, then guaranteed raises at a minimum tied to the Consumer Price Index. What was interesting to me was that the Illinois Association of School Boards, the IASB, lobbied against it being signed into law. They sought Governor Rauner's veto. And what was interesting about it, again, is that it helps us, I think through some of the complexities of the way that school funding works. The reason IASB was urging a veto was primarily on behalf of their rural districts, and they were saying that it was in effect an unfunded mandate for two reasons. Number one, if this were adopted in those counties or those school districts where the teachers are paid less than that, it would in effect eat up the entire increase in state dollars that they were giving. So it would divert or take away the discretion to use those dollars for other things, and it would put them essentially into one spend. The second thing is that by coupling it with the recently enacted law requiring school boards to contribute the normal pension costs for any salary increase above 3%, it would have the effect of requiring local school districts to increase pay above 3% and then require those districts to pay the additional pension costs. So the reason I'm telling you this is not because that's the going rate for teachers in our district, but it's an interesting way to think of the follow-on effects of that cap of 3%. Three more quick ones. On August 23rd, the governor signed State Bill 2838 into effect. This was due to a lot of efforts by EdRed, along with a consortium in higher education. This establishes a process for districts and community colleges to offer increased dual credit opportunities to high school students, something that we've talked a lot about, and I know the Education Committee, in cooperation with Dr. Holland, has spent some time looking into, and I know that there's more to come. The next thing on EdRed's agenda in this regard is implementation. So now that the law has passed, the Illinois Community College Board will be developing rules for implementation, and there will be appointments to a dual credit committee. One of the things that they'll be doing is creating model partnership agreements so that higher education organizations can partner with schools. Last two. Governor Rauner in August vetoed a bill that would have mandated the creation of something called the Emotional Intelligence and Social and Emotional Learning Task Force. His reason for the veto was that he felt that creating a task force without any substantive directives to address the issue only added to government expense without assurance of healthier outcomes for students. I don't know enough about the bill to say whether or not I think the task force was a good idea. The one thing I will say is that I think that it's interesting that it's being discussed at the state level. It's something social, emotional wellness and learning has been an important topic for this board for a long time. It's interesting to see it being discussed at this level. And lastly, the governor vetoed a bill that would have required 3 of his 9 appointees to the Illinois State Board of Education to be representative of the educator community, saying that he felt that there was enough representation from that particular group already. The end.
So just one quick question. The first issue, adequacy. It sounds like that's not an issue in Lake Forest because we're not above that mean, but it sounds like Libertyville would be based on.
Well, there's adequacy, which is a measure. Let's leave aside what it actually measures, but it has to do with what the spending is in a given year. Libertyville, I think what you're referring to is the size of their reserve. And the trade-off is that in the activity going on in Lyle, it was viewed as an attempt by the school board to build the reserve on an aggressive basis. You're right, we are not in heavy, aggressive reserve building. So there's an odd political component to it, and there's a quote actually from the superintendent of Lyle saying, I understand your concern about growing an unnecessarily large reserve, but the follow-on effect is going to be that we're going to have to cut programming year to year. You're going to have the unanticipated consequence that we're not going to be able to fund operations.
Thank you. Diana, anything to report from the foundation or boosters or?
Well, they've been meeting.
Really? Already?
I've got underway
Wow.
quickly. The boosters met August 21st, and they're meeting right now, tonight. The fall sports are underway, as evident by JD and all the noise downstairs. Their pink out game is October 5th, and you'll want to come because they're giving out pink sunglasses, care of North Shore. So don't miss that one. There are 671 athletes in the fall sports season, so 296 boys and 305 girls, and that's up from last year. So kind of fulfilling one of our goals that our kids are involved, so that was exciting. They just wanted to let everybody know that they reminded all the coaches and all the teams that the policy that we adopted last May on communication, where all coaches should be communicating with the parents and players through their lfschools.net email, and that was very much being enforced and talked about, and that's just kind of a safeguard for all of our kids and adults. So if any parent is seeing anything that's coming through that's not through that account, they should contact Tim or Dr. Holland. Couple other things for the boosters. They give out this wonderful thing called Summer Camp Grant. So if any kid goes to a summer camp, the boosters interviews them beforehand. There was 130 of those people who signed up for interviews, and they can receive up to $150 if they write a letter in to the boosters letting them know how their camp experience was, what they learned, how it's going to improve their play so that they can beat Lake Zurich, et cetera, et cetera. So September 14th was the last day to do that, but I know the boosters are always willing to take a last-minute letter. So if anybody's still out there with that, please send it in. And the Spirit Store has fresh merchandise. So Dr. Holland says we all have to wear it on Friday at school, so shop, shop, shop. The APT met September 5th. I believe they had EKG testing on September 12th. Which is always a great thing to just do a body check, make sure that everybody's healthy. And that's only offered every other year, so you'll have to wait if you didn't do it this year. Dr. Holland alluded to Career Connections, how they're gearing up for open doors on November 1st and 2nd, and they're hoping to have 260 students participate. So once again, fulfilling our district board goal of getting our kids involved in things. The directory is online today, so if you want to call anybody or look them up. It's going to be out in print by mid-October. And the foundation is meeting for the first time this Wednesday, the 19th, so we'll have more to tell you about next week. But they are gearing up for another great year, too. So the parent groups are up and running.
Thank you. Okay, ready to move on to the action item part of the agenda?
Wait, I get to play too, don't I?
Oh, NSSC, I skipped right over.
No. I don't have much to report. Probably you were afraid I was going to be like Sally, but... As we look at our board packets, I just want to announce that NSSCD went to a new board packet program too. We're doing a program called Board Doc. It's new. If anybody goes onto the NSSCD website and you need a tutorial, just give me a call. Secondly, we had a lot of staff transitions in the last period from when school let out till now, and one of the bigger changes was our Jen Hermes, which is irreplaceable. They had to replace it with 2 people because they couldn't find anybody that had the time or the certifications to do it. So they came up with a rather unique program where they have Mr. Asif Data will be on part-time 125 days a year. And then Miss Yasmin Data, her Asif Data's brother's wife, will be there for 80 days of the year. And my only complaint was that as a part-time employee, I didn't think he should get 100% health insurance, but everybody else thought he should, so he did. That's all I have.
First up, adoption of the 2018-2019 budget. Anything more, Jen, that you want to say? So I'll call for a motion, just to remind everybody we haven't met for a while. I'll call for a motion, then a second, then any discussion. May I have a motion to adopt the 2018-2019 budget?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education adopt the 2018-2019 budget.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any questions, comments? Okay, I have some. I just want to make sure this gets reflected. This is the 3rd year in a row we've approved a deficit budget, meaning our expenditures are greater than our revenues. Not something we're happy with. We're putting the programs in place that the school and staff and the administration and the community need. 3 years ago, we did not have an actual deficit, but budgeting deficits, eating into our reserves to maintain our programs is not something that we want to continue to do. So that is not a question, more of a statement and a comment. This budget has a deficit of about $500,000. Anything else? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Dr. Nemkes?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mrs. Kreiling?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thanks. Next up is approval of the administrator teacher salary benefits report, which is a formality. We're approving the administrator and teacher salary report from prior year's staff. That's what I believe this is, correct? So may I have a motion to approve the administrator teacher salary benefits report?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the administrator teacher salary and benefits report.
Second?
Second.
Any comments, questions? Janice, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon? Mrs. Kreiling?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Dr. Nemkes?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is approval of the 2018-2022 Superintendent Delineating Agreement between Lake Forest High School District 115 and Lake Forest Elementary School District 67 and Michael Simic. I'll remind everybody, we share the service of our superintendent. The actual contract is with District 67. We have a delineating agreement with School District 67. I'm going to read the whole motion so somebody who makes the motion doesn't have to read it all again unless they want to. So, may I have a motion to approve the new multi-year 2018-2022 performance-based delineating agreement with related exhibits between the Board of Education of Lake Forest High School District 115, the Board of Education Lake Forest Elementary School District 67, and Michael Simic, consistent with Section 10-23.8 of the Illinois School Code, in that the goals and objectives have been met by the superintendent of the previous agreement with a 1.75% salary increase included as discussed in executive session. So may I have a motion?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Janice, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Nemkes?
Aye.
Mrs. Kreiling?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Mr. Marcuson?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Nay, and I have a statement. As the boards of education, we have one primary duty, which is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. We are extremely fortunate to serve in a high-performing district with generous resources and the ability to attract top talent. However, after watching Mr. Simic up close for the past 3 years, I do not feel that he fills the high-performing bill. He's a nice man and well-liked in the community, but I do not find his performance worthy of a 4-year renewal that costs our districts $348,000 per year. I have many frustrations with Mr. Simic's work, which I can't take the time to delineate here, but they fall into 3 broad categories: poor planning and communication, inadequate attention to detail, especially financial, and most importantly, a lack of clear vision about what Lake Forest High School needs to improve and how to implement that change. This is a time of great opportunity for both boards, 115 and 67, a chance to seek innovative leadership that will take our schools to the next level. After much thought and discussion with fellow board members, I've concluded I cannot vote to approve a 3rd term for Mr. Simic as superintendent.
Motion. Janice, that was the last vote, so. Motion carried. Next up is approval of the Municipal Advisor Agreement between Raymond James and Associates. This is to allow Liz Hennessy, who previously worked at William Blair, now works at Raymond James, who's been absolutely fabulous, to continue on as our advisor as we refund, refinance, and look at other financing options. So, may I have a motion to approve the Municipal Advisor Agreement with Raymond James?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education adopt the Municipal Advisor Agreement with Raymond James and Associates, Inc.
Second.
Second. Oh,
Second. Any comment? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Kreiling?
aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekes?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon? Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mr. Marcuson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Sorry, Diana reminded me I went out of order. Next up is approval of a support staff resignation agreement. May I have a motion to approve the support staff resignation agreement?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the support staff resignation agreement.
Second?
Second.
Any comments, discussion? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Marcuson?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekes?
Aye.
Mrs. Kreiling? Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is approval of an intergovernmental agreement for library services in the amount of $500. May I have a motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement for library services, please?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the intergovernmental agreement for library services in the amount of $500.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any comments or discussion on this?
I feel moved to speak. Rather than describe in great detail why I am a supporter of this, I'm going to ask instead if it's okay, and I'm not sure if it is. I had asked Eric Bailey, who is the current head of the Lake Bluff Library, for a report on how the program has worked and the reasons why it has been a success. And I got a really nice outline of both the benefits philosophically as well as the benefits in a tangible sense. And I would very much like this to be part of the record of the school board meeting without me reading it to you chapter and verse. Is that possible to do? To put it into the record? Great. That's what we'll do. I don't know how that works.
Okay, I comment also. I know this has come up year after year after year, and I just really think there ought to be a way to fund it so that Lake Bluff doesn't have to basically fund it twice and Lake Forest fund it once. And what I'd say Lake Bluff, because Lake Bluff already pays for the agreement, and now we're taking funds when we're running a deficit, even though it's a small amount of money. At the end of the day, every penny counts. You know, if we're running a deficit. And so I just think there ought to be a way to figure out how, another way to do it where $500 can come out of Knollwood. So,
I think it's a good thing. I think if this is the only way these kids could get library services, I'm okay with allocating $500 of our budget for it.
I sent it to the board, but I would very much like it to be part of the record.
We did. Okay, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mrs. Carling?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
I'll abstain, just so I don't sound like a total grouch.
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next up is approval of press issue. These are our new policies, revised policies. Press issue 98 and 5-year review, first reading. May I have a motion to approve the first reading of press issue 98 and 5-year review as presented?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the first reading of Press Issue 98 and 5-year review as presented.
Second.
Okay, I thought I made a copy of this, and you're going to have to bear with me, but one of the policies that talks about disposition of equipment talks about fair market value, and I think where we meant to say less than fair market value, it says greater than fair market value. And if someone has a copy of that, I thought someone would give me a nickel for even finding that, reading it that closely. Do you have it? Does anybody have a copy of these? Where are they in the pack? Okay, here. Can I just send it to you and say as revised if it needs to be revised? Is that fine? Okay. First reading. All right, I will find it and send it to you. And someone will give me a nickel if I'm right. And I'll buy everybody.
We'll get you a Diet
I'll buy
Coke.
everybody Diet Coke if I'm wrong. Okay. We already had a second?
Second.
Any comment?
I do. I have one other question. So this is also part of the first reading. It's 6:135. It's called Accelerated Placement Program, and it describes how in broad terms, how the Accelerated Placement Program works, including providing for a process to consider students for eligibility. Given that we know one of the most impressive improvements that we've seen during Dr. Holland's tenure and Mr. Semek's has been getting rid of the restrictive rails on access to accelerated education. I felt that there could be more description about how students could be considered for advanced placement, either through their own request or through that of their parents. I thought that the way that this was written by the service we subscribed to was fairly vague. And so one of the requests I have is not necessarily that we don't adopt this language, but that we also have more communication available to parents and students who might like to be considered for it. And it may be that that's already in place, but I would love for us to be more proactive in terms of making it clear that there are many paths and that we'll make those opportunities as broadly available as possible. Do you have any comment?
Why not?
This kind of makes it sound like there's a process and, we'll let you know how it works. But I think maybe some statement of our willingness and our desire to be inclusive would be beneficial.
Good idea. Shayla, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say most of the policies in there are very broad and rely on our school district to develop procedures. that clarify them. So that's definitely something we can do.
And I think you're right, Dr. Holland. I'm not sure that we shouldn't adopt this. It's sort of enabling, but maybe the right answer is then that we individually as a district provide more detail more informally.
Yeah, I just want to have one point of clarification on this. The accelerated placement program, as listed in this policy, is not the same as the AP.
No, I know it's not. I know that it's not. Although I'm interrupting, you may want to speak more to that. I thought it was more broadly about making opportunities available to our students, and if that's the desire, I could imagine something more inclusive, more inviting, but maybe in the context of in a more informal
Right.
description.
In policy committee, we like to keep things broad, general.
Okay, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mrs. Carling?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is, the board as necessary of the following, so that the board may consider its disposition district personal property that has an anticipated market value greater than the district's capitalizations. Shouldn't it be less than? It says greater than in mine. Oh, maybe it was fixed. Cool. Okay. Next is approval of policy 3:50 administrative personnel other than the superintendent update, first reading. What is this? Why is this different than, nobody knows, okay. I didn't see it being any different than what was all the other stuff.
I can answer that for you. So what
Okay.
it is, we do have administrative personnel that's not governed necessarily by contract. So you basically have your union contracts, you have your superintendent, and you have other administrative personnel other than the superintendent. So what governs their benefits, what things are outlined, and specifically what we're attempting to do with this, I believe, is in regard to the change in the TRS limitations or penalties for retirement, the 6% to the 3%.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the first reading of policy 3:50 administrative personnel other than the superintendent update.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Any other comments, questions? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mrs. Carling?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next is adoption of a resolution for incurring debt. Jen, is this to allow us to refund?
It actually isn't, but it certainly does help. So obviously, we use Chapman and Cutler as our advisor on our debt issuances, and this is just updating a resolution that says we're going to follow all of the rules and regulations that are put forth to acquire debt. So they'd like to see that the board approves this policy, which provides a little bit more detail than the general type policies that we just talked about, to kind of have it just on record for our district, and also the rating agencies like it as well. So just
Okay.
asking us to adopt it and have it and saying we're following the rules that we are.
Okay, so the record reflects, we're not planning to incur any additional debt. We're just getting our ducks in a row.
This is just ducks in a row, and we would be presenting that even if we weren't contemplating a refunding.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the resolution for incurring debt?
I move that the Lake Forest District High School, or the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education adopt the resolution for incurring debt.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Any other comments, questions? May I have a roll call, please?
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Mrs. Carling?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is adoption of a resolution to prohibit sexual harassment. Could someone talk about why we have this, why we're doing this?
I can't believe it wasn't on the books already. Is this the first such policy, or?
Ted, help me out here. Wasn't this just an update to it? Didn't we? Yeah, it was more like an update to some minor language changes, I believe.
So we need to adopt a resolution on a regular basis to make sure everybody knows we prohibit it? Okay. So we had something. We did have a policy on the books. Okay. Okay. May I have a motion to adopt the resolution to prohibit sexual harassment?
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education adopt the resolution to prohibit sexual harassment.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any comments, questions?
Do you want Rebecca to give you further?
Oh, okay, sure. That'd be helpful.
Ted and I seem to have forgotten everything that happened, so we'd like to have someone who knows.
You were actually 100% right. It's just an update, and we did have it before, and we follow all of the procedures and guidelines.
Is there a reason why we are doing these separately from the others? Is it because it's the second reading, or is it because you want HR initiatives to be adopted separately?
I didn't think it was separate, but I didn't look at the packet before I walked up here. So no, it's just part of the first reading.
Okay, next is, I'm sorry. A roll call vote, please.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Mrs. Carling?
Aye.
Mr. Murkison?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is our Human Resources Report. A little bit more on here than normal because of the start of the school year, so may I have a motion to approve the Human Resources Report as presented?
I move Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve Human Resources Report as presented.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Okay. Any comments, thoughts, questions? I'll just make another request that this report be annotated with some notes that could provide a little bit more explanation than what's included on the tabular form. I had some questions which Mr. Simic answered, some of which I'd like to get on the record. So the new RTL MTSS coordinator, who is he replacing?
When we restructured, we went down to two deans this year. Our deans in the past, we've had 4, we went to 3. All of them had additional responsibilities in addition to dean responsibilities. A part of that restructuring was to tease that apart as we went down to 2.
Student Services Director? Or do we have a student? No.
No, this isn't. Typically, in the past, Frank Lesniak, he was Dean/RTI MTSS coordinator. It's the same way Michaeline Tomek was Dean/Student Activities Director. All of them had additional responsibilities that made up their full-time position, but decreasing and going to 2 deans, the responsibilities we needed to identify where those were going to go.
So this is a new position?
This is a restructured position from one that we had before.
Okay. And then the reason for Brian and Steve Clegg going to 1.1, adding a 0.1 to their workload.
So the reason for the overload is because after staffing, we identified a 0.4 social studies position. In the July packet, you actually approved 0.4 Jorge, and he since actually accepted a full-time position with his current district. So that left us in late July, August, with an opening, and it's econ and civics, which is a really tough grouping of endorsements to secure a teacher that late. So right now, we're only overloading first semester. We're going to go ahead and repost for second semester.
And then my last question, are all of these already hired and in place and started the school year?
Yes.
The other thing that I'd like to see, I know, things happen, and I know sometimes we have to approve summer school teachers that we didn't know about, but even though we didn't meet last month, I would like to put something in place where we know about this stuff before they're actually hired. Otherwise, we're just rubber stamping it. There's nothing we could really do to affect anything.
I know a
we
lot
get
of the
weekly
summer
updates.
school positions that are on there are substitutes, so as people need to be off, we do have to secure substitutes. So we do bring every hire to the board, so I certainly can include that in updates.
We have the ability to ask questions. Like I said, I understand the Jorge, Brian, Steve thing better now, but it would just be nice to know while we still have the ability or the perceived ability to make a difference.
Sure.
Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Mrs. Kreiling?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thanks. Next is our consent agenda. I'll remind everybody that any item may be removed from the consent agenda at the request of any of us. So may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items, including the approval of disbursements, payrolls, and financial statements for June 2018, minutes of a regular meeting and workshop from July 9th, 2018, minutes of an executive session from July 9th, 2018, minutes of a joint board meeting executive session from July 19th, 2018, and disposal of audio recordings from September 6, 2016.
I move that the Lake Forest Community High School District 115 Board of Education approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Any thoughts, questions, comments? May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lane?
Aye.
Dr. Elliott? Dr. Nemekis?
Aye.
Mr. Mormon?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Markison?
Aye.
Mrs. Kreiling?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. We might make it home by halftime, I think. So we had some FOIA requests. Janice Schnobrich, a resident, that status is complete. NBC Universal made 3. Commercial requests, that status is complete. Amanda Massey, an Oak Park resident, made a request, and that status is complete. And HBO Real Sports, kind of cool, made a request, a commercial request, and that is pending. Some announcements. I'd like to make one. You're going to see a posting on our website where we are going to solicit the community for members of our committees, Ed Committee, Finance Committee, and also the Board of Ed. I mean, we sometimes have openings prior to an election, and we would just like everybody who's interested to let us know, fill out a short form, just so we have a record of everybody that wants to do this. Other announcements, homecoming is this Friday, September 21st. The dance is September 22nd on Saturday. I can't believe I know who your daughter's going with, but I do, and that kind of frightens me. This is a very small town. And Monday, October 8th is Columbus Day, no school, PSAT testing on October 10th, and our next Board of Education meeting is October 15th, 7 p.m. right here in this room. May I have a motion to adjourn the Lake Forest Community High School Board meeting?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.